Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute just to get everyone into the room. So bear with us for just another minute. Thanks. All right, looks like everyone has kind of trickled in. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Scott Siphon with Moxa, and I'm here to kick things off as your host today. So I'm really excited we're all here to talk about a topic that all of us on this webinar are dealing with, or at least should be. Cybersecurity is an evolving topic. It's something where everyone is at a different point in their journey. Because of this, we think today's topic will be highly relevant to all of you in some capacity, either from a knowledge or an implementation perspective. Our takeaway for each of you is to understand 3 simple methods that can help safeguard your network. To run through this today, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists, Todd Desso and Marty Wachi, both from Moxa as well. Many of you know Todd from our past webinars, or the fact that he's been here at Moxa for over 14 years in some capacity, whether it's product, sales, business development, or marketing. Alongside Todd is our main presenter, Marty Wachi. Marty has been in the industry for over 25 years with much of that around focused on cybersecurity. He's been at companies such as Cisco, D-Link, and now with Moxa. So I know you'll enjoy what he has to share with you today. So quick reminder, please send us your questions throughout the presentation. We'll address as many as we can at the end. So please send those in. Also, just a reminder, we will send a copy of this recording to you tomorrow in an email, so look for that. So now with all that out of the way, let me hand things over to Todd.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you for the intro, appreciate it. Marty, thanks for talking with us today, and the attendees for joining us on this webinar. Today, we will be discussing the trends and market activity as it relates to network security. As Scott noted, we will provide insight on a few simple methods for OT network defense. At the end of the presentation, we will host a Q&A session addressing any questions or comments you have. That said, to get started, if you've participated in Moxa webinars before, you know we like to open up our discussion about what's relevant today. Specifically, what market forces and trends are creating challenges, needs, and opportunities. Now, we know supply chain disruption and component shortages are dominating most of the headlines. However, it's important that we continue to understand the evolution of network security. With that said, Marty, let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the marketplace today.
Hey, thanks, Todd. So I think a lot of you have seen in the news, there's pretty much every month, almost every week, it seems like some new cybersecurity attack. If you look at some of the most recent ones this year, Facebook, University of California, Colonial Pipeline, Kaseya, especially the last 3 big ones, all ransomware. Definitely a trend towards that. There's definitely motive from the standpoint of, the financial aspect, opportunity from the standpoint that a lot of these networks probably made themselves a target by not implementing probably security to the extent that they could have. I think as a result of that, what we're seeing already, we were seeing before, the convergence of IT and OT, but that's converging, I think, even faster now as a result of these security breaches and threats. As you look at some of the IDC data that we quote here, if you look at from an operating perspective, we've kind of crossed that tipping point where, the IT and OT from a security operations perspective are now integrated. They're not really separate from an operational reporting structure. I think really interesting is that when you look at the security management, the recognition that managing security from an OT and IT as separate entities is one that you can already see over 70% are being managed by one team. And then on top of that, kind of just adding gas to the fire, through digitization or just adding that many more devices, increasing the surface area of attack. And then as a result of that, and just having more devices that we're having to track, the need and importance for having better visualization at the application and user level in terms of what's on my network.
Yeah, Marty, that's very good insight, and certainly what our teams are seeing firsthand in our customer engagements. One point I would add to your comments is there also seems to be a wide range of knowledge that exists across network security in the OT environment. It actually provides us a great opportunity to both teach and learn. So with that said, I think this is a good time to gain some insight from our audience via polling question on what security technologies they are using today. So with that said, if you could all take a moment to answer the following question. What security technologies do you use today? Answers being, and these are multiple choice. You can pick as many as you'd like, and there's no wrong answer. So first, VLANs and managed switches. Number 2, network address translation or NAT. Number 3, virtual private networks, VPN. Number 4, firewalls. Number 5, transparent firewalls. Number 6, intrusion detection systems, IDS. 7, intrusion prevention systems, or IPS. 8, virtual patching. And number 9, I don't know. So give a few minutes here, get people to put in their answers. Drum roll. Okay. Very good insight. Very good insight.
So I think I think from looking at that, one of the interesting things that I saw was there's a high usage of actual firewalls, but actually a very small percentage of users that were also using transparent firewalls, which we will talk about. So I think that's kind of an interesting insight that we'll talk about later, Todd.
Yeah, it was a good mix. It did, it was, the I don't know. Look, it's okay. At the end of the day, we all want to maximize the products and technologies we utilize. And with network security tools, we hope they minimize the potential bad that can occur, because we definitely know there's some bad actors out there. So Marty, speaking of bad, you mentioned a few cybersecurity attacks earlier in the presentation. I know reading about those events that there were 1+ billion people potentially affected. At this point, what guidance is being shared?
All right, so that's a good question, Todd. So if you look at the last 2 attacks specifically, the Colonial Pipeline, the Kaseya attack, both of these were ransomware attacks. Pretty big impact in the news. We took kind of a statement here by the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and they were offering some mitigation guidance after the last attack, really urging businesses to take several steps to kind of beef up their security. 3 of which we're going to cover based on their recommendations. So limiting communication between critical assets and known IP addresses, kind of whitelisting, blacklisting types of things, using virtual private networks and, a firewall to, separate and segment the network. I think an important takeaway here is, and just to set expectations, even if you do everything that we recommend or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, it's really not about making your network so that it's impregnable. That'll never happen. What we're really trying to do is help you so that your network is less of a target. So if we use like your neighborhood and your home as an analogy here, so if everybody on your block, for instance, has some type of ADT security sign out in front of your house, what we really are trying to talk about today is how can you make your house, your business, your customer less of a target, right? Less attractive. And really what we're saying here is, if everybody's got ADT, what do I do to be able to, get a dog, put a beware of dog sign so that, again, relative to my neighbors, relative to my industry peers, I'm going to be less of a target. That's really what we're talking about. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah. Marty, we've worked together a good bit on this topic, and there's one thing that I hear you state often when it comes to security, that it's a journey. It's not a destination. And in saying that, I know that this journey for folks is different for everybody. It's dynamic, it changes. With that, I think what we want to do is provide a little insight on what's happening in the market. We are now going to discuss a few simple things that can be implemented to minimize some of this exposure.
All right, so let's get started here. So again, this is not in any particular order. And again, this is kind of following the guidelines of the CISA and kind of what they put out there. It looks like from the poll, almost everybody, or at least the majority of you, are already using these security techniques. And I think what we're trying to do today is help you see how some of the things that you're already using can be implemented in other ways to continue to augment your security without really introducing any type of new technology to your network. So the first one we'll talk about is VPNs. There's kind of the traditional use case of more of a wide area or remote access, but how it can be used internally to protect critical assets in communication on your network. Method two, really network address translation. Pretty much everybody that accesses the internet today uses this. You use it at your home, likely it's being done in your business. But especially for automation networks, this offers some other advantages, not just from a security perspective, but from adds, moves, and changes and scalability perspective. So we'll cover that. The other piece that we will also talk about, which again was kind of what we pointed out in the survey questions, was the use of transparent firewalls. And this is really probably, if there's one thing to remember from today, this is it, where even if you have a firewall today, deploying additional transparent firewalls to your network allows you to do some of that whitelisting, blacklisting that was recommended in terms of taking steps to help safeguard your networks. So with that, let's jump in and get started. So I thought a good starting point would be, really talking about the differences between managed switches and routers. Again, from the poll question, a lot of you are using VLANs and managed switches, which is great. But switches are generally used to connect devices to form networks, as you can see there on the left here, where you're connecting them up and creating networks here, like in these pictures and these diagrams. They're generally less expensive. They have security features like VLANs, ACLs, and some QoS. Generally, they're higher performance compared to a traditional software-based router. When you look at the routers, generally they have more advanced security. So in addition to the VLANs, ACLs, and QoS, they do routing, they do NAT, they have the firewalls and VPNs. A lot of the technologies that, again, were being emphasized in terms of how to beef up your security. Routers tend to have a lower forwarding performance, so that's kind of a downside. From a Moxa perspective, those of you that are familiar with our EDR 810 or EDR G9010, these are hybrid switch and router, so they kind of combine the best of both worlds. So in the first example for VPNs, kind of look at how they got started. If you look at this and see how when you had remote access workers dialing up on landlines, a lot of times you'd have remote sites connected by private lease lines. As you can see from the table here, this was probably some of the best security because, again, it was all private, point-to-point connections. Speed, though, was kind of limited. Flexibility was limited because you were limited to the service providers of what you had in your area that you could connect. And it was very, very expensive because it was metered and you paid by the packet. Fast forward to today, now you've got the internet, much higher speed. You're using things like maybe an EDR to do VPN tunnels and create remote access for remote workers. So security is very good. Flexibility and performance is much better, very high, because you can use a bunch of different access technologies and just run a VPN over it. And from a cost perspective, it's much less expensive. Now, if you think about why you did this, was the internet wasn't a secure network. So you used a VPN over the wide area, whether it was a remote worker or remote site, to encrypt this traffic. Well, you can use the same technique on your internal network. So if you've taken over a facility, if you've expanded or you're growing, or maybe your facility is just older and you're trying to increase security between critical points, you can actually run a VPN on your local area network to prevent anyone from being able to access it on the network. It increases authentication capabilities. You still have a high flexibility of media. You can combine fiber with copper. Although it won't be line rate, it does kind of let you overlay a layer of security over your existing infrastructure in the event that you're not able to make all the changes that you'd like to immediately with your network. So that's using a technology that you're already used to in a way that might be helpful. Another example for method 2 would be network address translation. So again, we all probably use this at home or around our businesses. Network address translation essentially masks internal IP addresses from the external network. It allows you, in the case of a manufacturing environment, to use the same address across multiple machines, which I'll show you here in just a second. You can see the internal network here in red. So there's only kind of these 5 addresses which would make up the internal network. And then these individual cells or skids could have, either the same or different IP addresses, which allows you to localize the traffic, isolates it within that cell or pod. But really the business advantage maybe even outweighs the security from the standpoint that it makes rolling out devices much easier. So if you need to increase the number of cells or pods, you can do that very easily. It makes replacement if something goes down a lot easier because you have all the same IP addresses. So if you look at this like machine OEM example, you've got your plant network, which is the .1.1 network up here. You've got your pod down here that, you look at the PLC, HMI, they all have a unique address, but, look at the next cell, they all have the same ones. So if your PLC, for example, goes down, you can replace it, same IP address, just drop it in. You need to create a third cell, no problem, put the gear out there, plug it in, put it behind, a NATed device, and off you go. So this is definitely something that can help you to help scale the network and do some things that make it much easier while at the same time offering you a level of protection. The third method, and probably the most important one, especially trying to stop today's threats, is this use of a traditional firewall for internal networks. So as we talked about before, routers are used to connect networks together. In this particular case, you can see here in this example, this firewall is really separating 2 different network segments, which have different subnets and IP addresses, using the firewall rules, NAT, all of those things to filter out traffic. Unfortunately, a lot of traditional IT-based firewalls don't have the OT protocols like Modbus and other filtering built in or makes it easy for you to use. And oftentimes, the security policies between OT and IT firewalls are different. But this idea of having to have 2 different subnets between the firewall for a lot of industrial examples may not be practical. In this example, you might have a single subnet that you really want to sub-segment, right? So even though it's a flat network, all one subnet, you might want to, and probably should, put some internal firewalls in place to be able to whitelist, blacklist, use some of that protocol filtering that we were talking about. So a lot of routers actually have what we call a transparent bridge mode, which allows you to put it on a single subnet and still use a lot of the firewall rules without having to have it between 2 different subnets, which in this case would allow you to continue to do deep packet inspection and filter out, a lot of the control traffic on your OT network. So just as an example here in a table format, Again, you could take a firewall that supports transparent bridge mode, stick it in your flat subnetted network. And in this particular case, you could offer firewall filtering rules, whitelist, blacklisting between the SCADA part of your network and some of these other devices here without having to change the IP networking so it becomes transparent, quote unquote, to the network without the NAT and the routing piece. And this is probably, if there's only one thing you do today from a takeaway perspective, this is probably the one thing that you could do to help continue to protect and mitigate, malware and other disasters from your network. So with that, let's kind of just summarize things here really quickly. So we talked about the three simple methods, which again align to some of the recommendations from the US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Again, these are not in any particular order, but using technologies that many of you are already using, VPNs, network address translation, and firewall, especially transparent firewall, allows you to do some things to increase the level of security. And again, relative, to your neighbors, using that ADT example, allows us to make you and your customers a little bit less attractive to those bad actors that are out there. So hopefully, again, this makes sense. And again, just to wrap up, I would say, if you only take one thing away from this, method 3, the transparent firewall, is something that all of you should be looking at to use more extensively in your operations.
Marty, thank you. That was great and good advice. So this is the part of the presentation where we shamelessly plug a Moxa solution. So Marty, what can we offer to the folks attending today? Our solutions to help them.
So here's what we have today. So our entire EDR family of secure routers support all of the security functions that we just talked about, the NAT, the VPN, the transparent firewall. So no matter which one you pick, the capabilities are there. We do support a wide range of price performance. So starting with the EDR 810 being kind of the most economical and lowest performance of the products, ranging all the way up to the new EDR G9010, which is relatively speaking up to 10x faster from a performance perspective. So it allows you to some applications that you might not have been able to do with some of our previous products. I do think it's worth mentioning, since we're focused on security, that by adding network management and our MXview product to this via our new single node license that starts at $16 per node, it allows you to add a lot of additional functionality to your existing Moxa managed product. So just as my last slide here as an example, if you had like an EDR, any of our EDRs, but in this particular case, the 9010 as an example, and if you were to add that MXview license to the product, all of these different features here, from the network visualization capabilities of device panel view, traffic and topology view, probably the most relevant one for today is the security view, which allows you to audit the device and see if it's configured properly based on 62443 and the different security levels there. But finally, I think the last piece, the network maintenance, is important from the standpoint that allows you then to do mass backups and restores of configuration, which eventually, if you do ever get attacked and have to implement a disaster recovery or any type of replacement, this will help facilitate that. So again, just something for you guys to know about in terms of adding additional functionality to your product.
Marty, excellent. Thank you. And again, it's a lot to unpack. We tried to do these in these 20-minute, 25-minute segments. So very nice job. And to the audience, hopefully the information that was shared today, regardless of where you are in your journey, will help you get started or reinforce the importance of the continuous efforts needed to secure networks. So with the remaining time, I did see a few questions popping in. Let's go to our Q&A session. Scott, can you tee us up here for what we saw?
Yeah, no, thanks, Todd. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, so we'll get through as many as we can. So the first question is, there's been a lot of great info here, but where is typically a good starting point? And so when I read this, I think there's different perspectives in answering this. So maybe Marty, from a product perspective, you can answer, and then we'll hand it over to Todd to answer from a customer perspective. So
Yeah,
Marty, you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a product perspective, you know, a lot of you are at a lot of different places. So, it's kind of not a one size fits all answer. But again, if you look at what we focused on today, which was the VPN, the NAT, the firewall, transparent firewall, a good starting point for you to be looking at, from a Moxa perspective, is our EDR products, right? Especially the 810 or the new G9010, because they are both a switch and a router. So for those of you that maybe only have managed switches today, that would be a great upgrade from a security perspective. For those of you that may have already installed some routers or looking for some transparent firewall capabilities, again, it's a really good place, kind of a no regrets product to look at.
Do you want to give your perspective too?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've seen a full spectrum, I would say, of expertise in the marketplace. Customers that have cybersecurity labs in various global locations monitoring cyber attacks on their equipment, to customers that still use default passwords on managed switches within critical cell operations. I guess, in talking to those various customers, I would give two pieces of insight. One, it's not really a question of where to begin as much as to begin. Get started. Whether you're implementing a number of the best practices that were discussed earlier in the poll question, or as Marty was showing in his 3 simple methods, or your activity, you're just getting started, it really is activity is critical. Moving, getting into the game, doing something. That's really important. I would say too, it's overwhelming at times. I mean, it's overwhelming for us, to present, to communicate this. There's a lot of stakeholders, and there's frankly a lot of opinions out there. So, what we often say is, stay educated, seek consultation. As with many things, a lot of times the fear of that unknown can be intimidating, but it's usually overcome with knowledge and confidence. And, we're always here to do our best to help out.
Thank you, guys. Both good answers. I think the messages don't stay complacent when it comes to cybersecurity. So, Marty, you mentioned something. You were talking about some product. So here's a question on product. Do Moxa switches have loop prevention protocols like STP, DLR, and MRP?
Yeah, so the managed switches definitely all support spanning tree. So, to help prevent some of those accidental creation of loops that can really, create problems and terrorize your network. So, yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. So the next question is, could an SSH tunnel work instead of using VPN to encrypt data and work on the application layer?
Generally, an SSH connection is really more a secure shell between, it's like for configuration of the device. You can use SSL as a layer 7 VPN, which is very similar to like what your bank uses anytime you're doing a secure transaction. In some cases, if you've got internal firewalls that you're trying to traverse, actually a traditional IPsec or layer 3 VPN actually may get blocked. So just like we have a terminology for transparent firewall, oftentimes like an SSL VPN is referred to as a transparent VPN, since it is able to traverse a lot of firewalls unless the firewall is set to block that traffic. So absolutely, you could use an SSL VPN in place of a IPsec VPN to do some of that internal tunneling.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Marty. We may have time for one, maybe two more. So the next question is, what do I need to do if I want to add additional network security to my existing networks to protect critical assets? Marty, you want to take a stab at that one too?
Wow, I mean, again, it depends on your starting point. if I look at it from kind of a generic no regrets, again, perspective, if you already have managed devices, one thing to look at would just be, are you using network management with those devices, whether it's Moxa's or somebody else's? Typically, adding network management is going to give you additional capability to the assets that you already have. So that would be the first thing, especially when it comes to backup and recovery and things like that. The second thing that I would look at from a product perspective, again, would be to look at adding transparent firewall capabilities to your network. It's kind of a cliche of more is better, but in a lot of cases, unless you have a very, very small network, and especially as you look at the trying to limit the surface area of attack, the more you can cut it up into smaller pieces so that if you do have a breach or an attack outbreak, it's contained, right? And it doesn't spread throughout your whole network. And as we showed in some of the other examples, although switches do have certain capabilities to limit and create VLANs and things like that, they typically don't have the same filtering capabilities as a firewall. So if you do have traffic that's going across segments of your network and things like that, it may be more difficult to properly segment and contain that traffic if you're only using managed switches.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. There are a couple more questions. We want to stick to our promise of a 30-minute time frame. So thanks for all the questions. We will get back to you as soon as we can if we did not address it today. So Todd, any parting thoughts before we go?
No, that concludes our webinar on improving OT network perimeter defense. As it relates to cybersecurity, and to reiterate that point that was discussed earlier, it's a journey, and one that's going to have bumps and turns along the way. Although challenging, staying disciplined, being educated, and keeping active in your efforts will definitely help you keep pace. And as I stated in my answer before, please know we're always here to help and offer consultation. Simply reach out to your Moxa sales representative. Let us know how we can help, or when you complete your post-webinar feedback, let us know there. Thank you, and as always, we do really appreciate the feedback, and we welcome your continued suggestions. It's these suggestions that build the content for these webinars that we do. So thank you very much, and stay well and talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.